Let me see. Let me see here where it mentions that.
Might be like right after you interpreted them or something.
Right. Well, that's what I was going to bring up. In Genesis chapter 41, when he has this dream,
Yeah.
it says that after having the dream, that he sent forth in verse 8, and he called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. So the ones who are wise, in certain contexts, are those who are able to interpret dreams. So if we define wisdom in this context, and it's like in Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar does basically the same thing that Pharaoh does here. He calls forth all the wise men, but then he's going to put them all to death because nobody can interpret the dream. So if we interpret the word wise in this particular text as one being able to interpret dreams prophetically or by the hand of God, then you can start to add a whole list of people to that. For example, Jacob, when Joseph came to him and showed him his dream, he interpreted it on the spot and knew exact meaning. So you could call him somebody that was wise. But then you have, as you move through the Old Testament, all of the prophets then would be considered wise men, because one of the things that they did on occasion was interpret dreams. A lot of times they didn't understand what they were interpreting, but that is one of the offices that they took on. So I would consider Daniel to be in that bunch, probably one of the most famous interpreters. And then, of course, when you get into the New Testament, speaking of Jesus, or Jesus speaking of himself, said that, Solomon was so wise, but a wiser than Solomon had arrived, speaking of himself. And so wisdom is not only the ability to interpret dreams, but is also, they would take on the role of one who would give advice, make judgments for those. So if you gave an exhaustive list of all the people that are called wise, or that would be considered wise, you would be listing probably, most major main characters in Scripture. When you think of the wisdom of Solomon, again, it's less of a prophetic thing and more of being able to make judgments and decisions, like with two women who have the two babies and the one rolls over and they swap and all that. So that'd be my short answer.
Okay, but now here's something to think about.
Okay.
You may not like this answer.
Okay.
For Solomon, again, it's a definition of wisdom. How many wives did he have?
Wives did Solomon have?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right.
Not a very wise man. It's kind of hard to keep out people happy, I'm just saying. So.
Well,
anyway.
every wise person is foolish in some way, so nobody's perfectly wise. Maybe that's why Jesus said it greater than Solomon is here.
There you go.
Because Jesus didn't have any wives, depending on which gospel you read. I'm kidding.
Wait a minute.
What is it, the Da Vinci Code? Or yeah. Anybody else have any Bible questions or keen observations? Okay, Zechariah chapter 4. Zechariah chapter 4. Quick facts about this chapter. It follows chapter 3 and precedes chapter 5. And of course, the book of Zechariah. This is within a series of visions. So there are 8 visions that are in quick succession here in the book of Zechariah. And this one, I believe, if I remember correctly, this one is the 5th one. Or your caption may say something different. But then next we have the flying scroll, and then a great one, the woman in the basket, and then these 4 chariots in chapter 6. My plan tonight is to... and then some crowns. So this should be the 5th one. 5, 6, 7, 8. Right. So this is the 5th vision in Zechariah. My plan is tonight to get all the way through chapter 5. We'll see how well we do there. A lot of this is pretty straightforward once you get the symbolism. Okay. The angel who was speaking with me returned and roused me as a man who is awakened from his sleep. He said to me, "What do you see?" And I said, "I see and behold a lampstand, all of gold, with its bowl on the top of it, and its 7 lamps on it, with 7 spouts belonging to each of the lamps, which are on top of it. Also 2 olive trees by it, one on the right side of the bowl, and the other on its left side. So, the picture that you have here, and a lot of preachers say, well, I'm no artist. Well, I am an artist. So, I'll draw it up here for you. We have 2 olive trees. Look at that. 2 olive trees. And I know that's not what an olive tree looks like, but I'm an abstract artist. And then you have this lampstand, and it has these 7. Then it says there's a bowl on top. So there's like a feeder that goes into these. And what you have is these olive trees. We'll see later, there's like these poles coming out of the olive trees, tubes coming out of these olive trees, into this lampstand. And it's feeding it so it will ever be burning. Okay? Now, the lampstand that we have with these 7 things on them it is going to figuratively represent something, but in Jewish history, in the Hebrew Bible, that lampstand is situated where? Situated in the temple, right? Right in the holy place. And the idea is that it's never supposed to go out, right? It's supposed to burn and burn. To keep it lit on a day-to-day basis. Here we have these olive trees, and they are feeding the oil into it so it never goes away, right? It's never going to stop burning. And then I said to the angel who was speaking with me, saying, "What are these, my Lord?" Now, notice he describes what they are in verse 2 and 3. He tells you what they are. There's 2 lampstands, and I see a lampstand, I see 2 olive trees. But then what does he mean then when he says, "What are these, my Lord?" What do they mean? He understands that that lampstand and those olive trees aren't just a lampstand and olive trees. Now, I got to bring this up for you. This is talking about the return from exile, the rebuilding of the temple, as we're going to see in a second. But this imagery of lampstands and olive trees is reintroduced where in the New Testament? The book of Revelation. You have the lampstand there in the first 3 chapters of Revelation, and the 2 olive trees are introduced in chapter 11. They represent 2 witnesses, the 2 witnesses of God. So here, though, they represent something a little bit differently, other than the 7 churches and the prophets and Moses. Here we see, though, that he's wondering, what are they? What are these, my Lord? And the angel who was speaking with me answered and said to me, "Do you not know what these are?" And I said, "No, my Lord." Now, he could have said, well, they're lampstand and olive trees. But no, he says, I don't know what they are. Then he said to me, "This is the word of the Lord to Zerubbabel, saying, Not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of hosts. What are you, O great mountain? Before Zerubbabel you will become a plain, and he will bring forth the top stone with shouts of grace, grace to it." What Zerubbabel is doing, as we're going to see in a moment, is rebuilding the second temple. Rebuilding for the first time the second temple after their return from exile. So the idea, at least what it seems like to me, is in verse 7, is they are taking stones out of this mountain, and he's saying that Zerubbabel is going to finish his task, not by his own power or might, but by the Spirit of God. God was going to be with him in the reconstruction of this temple. Then he says in verse 8, "Also the word of the Lord came to me, saying, The hands of Zerubbabel have laid the foundation of this house, and his hands will finish it." So there we have the interpretation of the mountain. "Then you will know that the Lord of hosts has sent me to you. For who has despised the day of small things?" You can imagine during this time, when they're getting started with the foundation, you can probably picture the pessimist saying, well, you got the foundation, but you really expect to rebuild the whole temple? Really? And then they got the walls, and they go, okay, yeah, you got the walls built up, but you actually think this is going to be done? And they kind of nag at you the whole time that you're doing it till finally it's completed. And so this is what you have in the situation, is all this pessimism. And he says, who has despised the days of small things? So, it is going to be built. Don't listen to the naysayers. You can finish it, and God's going to strengthen you in your reconstruction of it. Then he says in verse 10, but these 7 will be glad when they see the plumb line in the hand of Zerubbabel. These are the eyes of the Lord, which range to and fro throughout the earth. Remember, at the end of chapter 3, if you'll recall, there was a stone that was set before Joshua with 7 eyes. So this is, these are, we talked about this being representative of the omnipresence and omniscience of God. And so here in chapter 4, everybody's looking in and watching Zerubbabel construct this house. And God, of course, has a particular interest in it. And so he is watching and looking, and he would be happy to see it. Regardless of what man thought, God was happy to see Zerubbabel rebuilding this temple. The plumb line, we've talked about this before, is a string with a heavy object on the end to keep it straight, and this is what you would use to make sure everything was level and to measure the vertical distance of whatever you're constructing. And so Zerubbabel would be instrumental in rebuilding this thing, and everybody had invested interest in the reconstruction of it. It meant a reinitiation of the priesthood as intended. It meant getting back to all the sacrifices and offerings, and it also meant, most importantly probably, the presence of God was among them, symbolic of God's presence, since they would construct the most holy place and the holy place where God would reside. Now, that basically what Zechariah says in verse 11 is, that was a good answer, but that's not really what I was asking for. He says, what are these 2 olive trees on the right of the lampstand and on its left? And I answered the second time and said to him, what are the 2 olive branches which are beside the 2 golden pipes, which empty the golden oil from themselves? So he's saying, okay, I asked you the question, now let's hear the answer. So he answered me saying, do you not know what these are? And I said, no, my Lord. Then he said, these are the 2 anointed ones who are standing by the Lord of the whole earth. Now, the 2 anointed ones, so basically what you have is this. Let's see. You've got the lampstand here. You've got the trees here. And this would then represent the reconstruction of the temple and the reestablishment of the covenant and all these things there. And then this that's feeding into the olive trees would represent 2 witnesses. As he said, there are 2 anointed ones, as he said there in verse 14. The 2 there that are assisting in this project appear to me then to be Zerubbabel himself and also Joshua the high priest. They're the ones that have been introduced so far in the story, and here is Zechariah. They're the ones that are discussed in Ezra and Nehemiah as well as in Haggai, as being instrumental in the reconstruction of the Second Temple. So it appears to me that the olive branches that are working to feed into this project are these 2 people who were anointed by God. The high priest, of course, goes through an anointing process in his initiation ceremony, and Zerubbabel, who is he a descendant of? David. And so while he is not the king that would sit on the throne as prophesied, the Messiah, as we know the word. In fact, this is not the word Messiah, this word anointed ones. This is not the word Messiah that would be used to talk about that would be used to talk about Christ. Even though he wasn't the Messiah, he still was a descendant of David, leading the people once more. The thing was, though, is that he was not a king, he was a governor of Judah, appointed by the Persians during this time. So basically what you have here is the center candlestick representing the rebuilding of the temple, the entire facility, and then those two that were feeding into that, who are being strengthened by God to produce this everlasting or never-ending oil to allow the candlestick to burn, would be Joshua and Zerubbabel and the reconstruction of this second temple. Okay? A lot of this imagery is taken and used by John in the book of Revelation. Because keep in mind, in the book of Revelation, we kind of have a similar situation, a reconstruction of a New Jerusalem, right? Of a New Jerusalem. And so in the book of Revelation, we have this similar imagery being used to call to our memory books like the book of Zechariah, in which the second temple was being reconstructed. So it's used again in Revelation to remind us of that idea of return from exile, of reconstruction, of rebuilding, of something new in place of what was left behind. All right, does anybody have... Yes?
When you draw it out that way on the board, I could see another parallel
Okay.
to the two thieves on the cross with Christ on his cross and crucifixion. The candelabra, the lights, meaning Christ, and the shining over the world.
Right. I haven't thought about that.
I see no direct relationship, but when you draw it out, I can see
It looks like it.
parallel.
Yeah, especially when I abbreviate it and drew it like that, I can see where that might come across. All right, so there we go. The candlestick and the two witnesses. Let's go to chapter 5 now and do this one. Here in chapter 5, we've got the flying scroll, and also my personal favorite out of this section of visions, this basket that they have. This basket's there's some comedic value in one of these visions here. He said, "I lifted up my eyes again, and behold, there was a flying scroll. And he said to me, 'What do you see?' And I answered, 'I see a flying scroll. Its length is 20 cubits and its width 10 cubits, so the size of a billboard.'" Most likely this would be a scroll of Torah, of the law. Then he says this in verse 3. He said to me, "This is the curse that is going forth over the face of the whole land," talking about Israel. "Surely everyone who steals will be purged away according to the writing on one side, and everyone who swears will be purged away according to the writing on the other side." This is talking about, again, the reestablishment of the old covenant during this time. They're being brought back to their roots. Idolatry has already been taken away, and now they're going to take away stealing and false swearing, taking the Lord's name in vain, things like that in this new part. They still have some reform to accomplish. So in verse 4 he says, "I will make it go forth, declares the Lord of hosts, and it will enter the house of the thief and the house of the one who swears falsely by my name, and it will spend the night within that house and consume it with its timber and stones." This scroll is large, like a billboard, so that everybody in Israel can see it, and it's going to be used to extinguish the last bit of sin that remained in the house of Israel. Some bad habits that they had picked up, maybe in Babylon, maybe during the times of idolatry before that. All right, and so these first 4 verses are simply a declaration that the restoration process has not yet been complete. They might be back in Israel, they might be constructing the temple, but there was still some moral things that they had to get straight before they would be back to being Israel. All right, so there's the flying scroll. We got golden lampstand, 2 olive trees, and the flying scroll. Now we got verse 5, this basket, this ephah. "The angel who was speaking with me went out and said to me, 'Lift up now your eyes and see what is going forth.' And I said, what is it? So this one, he didn't quite know what was going on. This is the ephah going forth. Again, he said, this is their appearance in all of the land. And behold, a lead cover was lifted up. And this is a woman sitting inside this ephah or basket. So typically you wouldn't have a lead cover. So the presence of a lead cover should shock you. You're wondering, why doesn't it have a lead cover on this basket? And they lift it up, and there's a woman sitting within there. And then when they open it up and they see this woman, the angel says, this is wickedness. And he threw her down into the middle of the ephah and cast the lead weight on its opening. So so he puts the thing back down and covers it up, strong. So you can just picture that. It's like if you go in to do some yard work or something like that, and there's a piece of plywood or something like that on the ground, or some sort of structure, and what do you always kind of do? Kind of lift it up, to make sure there's no snakes or wasp nests or whatever built up under there. And so you kind of lift it up. It's sort of scary. Well, this is what they did. They opened up the basket. There's a woman. They said, this is wickedness. And they threw her back down there, put the lead weight on top so she couldn't get back out. And now in verse 9, they're going to ship her back to Babylon. So what you have going on here again is bringing Israel back to a holy state. And that includes getting rid of any bad habits that they picked up in Babylon, any sort of unfortunate sins that they have not gotten rid of yet. They're trying to get rid of it all. And so in verse 9, she lifts up her eyes and looked, and there was 2 women that were coming out with the wind in their wings. And they had wings like the wings of a stork. And they lifted up the ephah between the earth and the heavens. Now, this is kind of interesting, because usually when we have angelic beings pictured in anywhere in the Bible, what sort of shape do they take? Human, but specifically male, right? But in this case, we have these 2 women angels, or women spiritual beings, in this vision, of course, that are taking this woman in her basket with her lead lid on top of the basket away. And he says to the angel who is speaking with me, where are they taking the ephah? And he said to me, to build a temple for her in the land of Shinar. And when it is prepared, she will be set there on her own pedestal. They're being taken away to Babylon, is where this land is. And they're going to build a temple there. Now, this is interesting because it provides for us some foreshadowing of a future conflict between this temple that's being built and this new temple that's being built in the land of Israel's enemies. Remember, this is all symbolic. So they're getting rid of this wickedness. They're getting rid of this evil, but there's evil still brewing out there that's going to come and trouble Israel in the future. They're not out of the woods just yet, right? This is not the Messianic kingdom. There's still some stuff out there that's going to come and mess with them in the future. That their temple hasn't been built yet, their people haven't been set up yet, but it's coming. And so verse 11 is good in one sense because they're getting rid of the wickedness out of Israel, symbolically. But in another sense, it's kind of bad news because there's another opposing force out there still that's going to come and to afflict them later on. Chapters 4 and 5, again, really straightforward to me at least. The visions are kind of strange, but when you look at the explanations that the angel gives, and you can kind of see what's happening there. Anybody have any comments on chapters 4 and 5?
On verse 14, back on 4.
Okay.
So when it talks about, and in the court of the Lord.
Right.
So that wouldn't be, and I don't know what you said about the word anointed, I wasn't paying attention.
Okay.
But when it says standing by the Lord, it wouldn't be Jesus because it didn't say on the right hand, because he was always on the right hand. Is that right?
Well, I don't think it will be Jesus just yet because, well, for one, there's two anointed ones here, but also it's in the context of the rebuilding of this temple, and so it seems to me to be Zerubbabel and Joshua, the high priest. Now it foreshadows Jesus definitely, because Jesus would be the one who was the actual anointed one, the Christ, the Messiah, who would build the ultimate temple, the spiritual temple, the church. And so it is definitely foreshadows Christ and his role in the construction of the temple, the new covenant temple, but I don't think it's referencing Christ in this instance.
That's what I'm saying. When he was referenced, wasn't he always at the right hand of God? Was that his?
Yeah, I suppose so. Which is just an indication of prestige and
Opposed to standing by
power.
himself,
Right.
Okay, just curious.
Could be. Or standing. I think he was only standing by the right hand. When Stephen died? And every other place it says he was sitting at the right hand of the Lord. So. All right. Any other thoughts there on chapter 4 and 5? Okay, let's look at chapter 6 then. Let's look at chapter 6. All right, we'll do verses 1 through 10 and leave the other for next week, perhaps. Now I lifted up my eyes again and looked, and behold, 4 chariots were coming forth from between the 2 mountains, and the mountains were bronze mountains. With the first chariot were red horses, with the second chariot black horses, with its third chariot white horses, with the fourth chariot strong dappled horses. And then I spoke and said to the angel who was speaking with me, "What are these, my Lord?" The angel replied to me, "These are the 4 spirits of heaven going forth after standing before the Lord of all the earth, with one of which the black horses are going forth to the north country, with the white ones go forth after them, while the dappled ones go forth to the south country. When the strong ones went out, they were eager to go and patrol the earth. And he said, 'Go patrol the earth.' So they patrolled the earth." So these horses are representations of the Spirit of God, patrolling the earth. They're going out to search, they're going out to look, and they're going north, they're going south. And then we have in verse 8, "He cried out to me and he spoke to me, saying, 'See, those who are going to the land of the north have appeased my wrath in the land of the north.' The word of the Lord came also to me, saying, 'Take an offering from the exiles, from Heldai and Tobijah and Jediah, and you go the same day and enter into the house of Josiah the son of Zephaniah, where they have arrived from Babylon.'" So basically these horses are sent out, pictured as bringing Israel back home, basically. That God's wrath has been appeased in the north. They've been in Babylon, now they get to come back home. It's a long, sort of extended vision, 8 verses there, but the explanation of it's, again, fairly straightforward. They're just going to see whether or not the wrath of God has been appeased, and when they come back, it is, and so now they're going to take a offering and offer that up to God, and basically be thankful that they've arrived back home from Babylon, right? All the people are back home now. Does anybody have any comments on those 10 verses? It's really straightforward. There's not really much you can add to it or take away from it, or, to go here and here and here. It's kind of, you just read it and you say, "What does this mean?" And then he says, "Well, here's what it means." And he gives it to you and you go, "Okay, well, I guess that's that." Let's just go, we're on a roll. Let's just go ahead and do the crowns as well. All right. "Take silver and gold." Hey, the people next Sunday night that missed this, they're going to come in and we're going to say, "Go to chapter 7. They're going to, "Chapter 7? What?" Okay. "Take silver and gold and make an ornate crown and set it in the head of Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest. Then say to him, 'Thus says Lord of hosts, behold, a man whose name is Branch, for he will branch out from where he is, and he will build the temple of the Lord.'" Zerubbabel, by the way, just to let you know, means a branch that comes from Babylon, the branch of Babylon, the branch that shoots out of Babylon. And so you have a primary reference to Zerubbabel, but a typological reference looking forward to the work that Christ would accomplish in his day. "A man whose name is Branch, he will branch out from where he is, and he will build the temple of the Lord. Yet it is he who will build the temple of the Lord, and he who will bear the honor and sit and rule on his throne. Thus he will be a priest on his throne, and the council of peace will be between the two offices. Zerubbabel wasn't a priest. He couldn't be a priest, and he didn't sit on any throne. Zerubbabel, his involvement within this context, I think, is limited, because he was simply a governor appointed by the Medes and the Persians. He was not a king and priest. That office is reserved for Christ. He says, now the crown will become a reminder in the temple of the Lord to all these different people. Helem, Tobijah, Jediah, and Hen, the sons of Zephaniah. Those who are far off will come and build the temple of the Lord. Then you will know the Lord of hosts has sent me to you, and it will take place if you completely obey the Lord your God. So, completely obey the Lord your God, that goes back to the previous visions. Getting rid of wickedness, getting rid of the lying, getting rid of the thieving and the stealing. And if they would do that, then this temple would be rebuilt. This temple would be reconstructed, and all the people would be able to go back and to their normal worship schedules and things like that in the house of Israel. Now, the one that would be influential in reconstructing that temple again is Joshua and Zerubbabel. But this is, again, typological of what would take place in the New Covenant. In the New Covenant, whenever Christ would come to die on the cross and all these things, he would become the chief cornerstone. And instead of building a physical temple to honor him, what 1 Peter chapter 2 says in verse 5 is this: you also, as the living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house for a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. So they were building a physical temple, but this was looking forward to the time when Christ, who is the ultimate cornerstone, would build this spiritual temple, and people would come from all over, Jews and Gentiles alike, to participate in the building of this new covenant temple. Okay, so as we're reading through Zechariah, keep in mind the original context of the construction of the second temple, but also keep in mind the typological aspect of the text as well, looking forward to Christ, the root of Jesse, the branch of David. That would be the one that would construct the new covenant temple. Okay, so this one is, again, he's talking about that second temple, but that passage would not be fulfilled in the rebuilding of the second temple. It'd be fulfilled totally in the person of Christ and what he would do in giving us the new covenant. Okay? All right, does anybody have any questions about chapters 4 through 6? I know we kind of went through it sort of quick. A lot of it's kind of straightforward. All right, in that case, I will go ahead and cut that off. And next week, we'll get into chapter 7.